now hand over to Timothy.
Hello. Thank you very much for joining the meetup today. This has been a long time in the preparation, and I'm going to be giving a short introduction to the nonprofit Dreamorganism, which we're starting, and then Niels is going to do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the topics around being a human. We would also like to have discussion, questions, and chat at the end, so please feel free to take down notes. Niels is also very open to people who are in the moment not understanding something, just to ask that.
Yeah, please raise your questions if you have any.
Yeah, so it should be, there's no dumb questions. We want it to be understandable. And, yes, so what is the Dreamorganism nonprofit? In the name we have dream, so it's like a vision. It's a very large vision of like we actually want to fix everything, everything that's broken in society. We want to fix it. And the organism part is I really like this philosophy of looking at. I'm not sure where to look like myself or the camera to be much nicer with people. Yeah, the organism part is this holistic view of life as this interconnected, beautiful web of people and experiences and events, and yeah, it's trying to see the beauty in life, and oftentimes we see too much negativity, or so that's just like, yeah, where the name came from, Dreamorganism. So I'm going to start by clarifying a little bit of what it is we're trying to do. Maybe like the elevator pitch is to build new structures that instead of as a primary goal or means of making monetary wealth, the goal is to empower individuals. And the reason why that is something that I care about or we care about, I'll try to make clear now. So one of the goals, so I'm mixing here goals and principles, is to respect individuals. And this is something when I started to work with Niels and his techniques became very clear to me. It was always about explaining and seeing me as an individual. Well, a lot of people probably don't know my background. I've had a long history of dealing with mental health issues and depression, and being helped tremendously through the traditional means of cognitive behavioral therapy. But normally someone doesn't sit down with you and explain, what's really going on in the body and the science and aspect. You're more sort of treated as someone who's sick and they're trying to fix you. And Niels's approach was very much like, hey, I see you as a human being, and sitting down and sharing the details and the knowledge and the fundamentals, and you go away and you think about it yourself. And I really like this idea of seeing people as intelligent and respecting that. And oftentimes in the whole way the structures of our society are, with education, the needs of people, students are simply ignored, and we're told to sort of, you need to do what you're told to do this job, or sort of eventually you'll be free and so on. But we're very used to sort of ignoring each other and pushing each other into weird structures because that's what's normal. So that's like, yeah, the first goal of this is really having this holistic approach of like, let's look at individuals, let's empower them, and let's try and trust in people. And if we encourage them and support them, we'll get the best outcomes. All of the things that exist in the world were created by people, and instead of ThoughtWorks are very, very question, like we love to question and to look at society and how can we change this, or the system in the company is not working so well. We often tend to neglect that, hey, these things were created by us, and it's not something over there that's weird and that is oppressing me, but this is actually something that I can take on, and given enough skills and power, and I can actually start to make changes in these structures. And, the second focus that we have, besides working and focusing on individuals, comes from the principle of social bonds. This interconnectedness between all of us is actually like one of the most important things. If we look at companies and organizations, how most of us are probably motivated by money and think more about money than the connections. These really important things that we actually want to value. I see this a lot in Corona, even before that. A lot of parents will go to work and make money and spend a lot of their time and energy to make money and value, and not have that much time to actually spend and to see like, oh, my kids are not actually doing so well at school, and they're spending their whole time just playing video games and being lost and not actually doing so well. And most of parents don't have the emotional capacity to actually be there and to connect and to take care of their children and to listen to them and to to provide a safe haven of happiness, I would say. I want to talk a little bit more about that concept of social bonds and value. We often get this mixed up. This is like a theory I'm working on about where a lot of the problems come from in society is they're mixing up abstract concepts for reality. So if we look at, if I say value or wealth, a lot of people automatically think of money. And money is not actual wealth or value, it's just something that was created to represent that. And we see that a lot. I think money is the biggest example of how we chase this construct, this abstract thing, that's not actually what we care about. And so the third pillar of change that we're looking at, actually I forgot to round up that one. So when we look at money in society, it's tools and a means to allow us to come together and actually work together and cooperate. I can give you some of this, and now you're going to do something for me. And, like, we have a way to cooperate and actually work together, and we can see this has benefits. It's a great tool, but it's also sort of left. There's a lot of problems that come around from this, of chasing this abstract means of value instead of actually chasing things that are important to us. So we're very interested in exploring new means of value transfer. And the third pillar is about leaving no one behind. And this is about transforming existing systems and structures that we have in place. So we're not just going to go off and create our own little happy land and do different things or anything like that. But really, how do we work with these existing structures we have around us, governments, schools, offices, organizations, and how do we start to get our voices heard? How do we come together and say, hey, I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with X, Y, or Z. And it's a really fun exercise to talk to any professional you know, any human being, and ask them, what are you unhappy about? Children, doctors, everyone can name something where they can really see there's they can't do their job as well as they would like because of X or Y or Z. And most people, we're so used to having these barriers and these blockades and the bureaucracy and so on and so forth. And this part is like, how do we really make change in these areas? How do we come together and do, like, when we notice certain structures are in place that are harmful towards humans, how do we take them down and make alternatives? So, how many of the time? Okay, I have 3 more minutes.
Timothy, some people are writing this sounds not super clear all the time, so I don't know if there's you can be slightly closer.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little bit closer to the microphone.
Is that maybe if people can give a thumbs up, if that's a little bit of an improvement? Okay, well, sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Thank you for letting me know.
No worries.
So those are quite ambitious goals. And what sort of avenues or what sort of opportunities are there to do things about like how are we going to achieve these ambitious goals? So right now there's a couple of different thoughts that are going through our heads. There's a lot of funding actually from the European Union and other organizations for nonprofits to do social work. We also have one of the largest decentralized crowdfunding projects going on right now, which is the Catalyst project. And this is a very interesting opportunity to explore using cryptocurrency, sort of decentralized technology, explore new ways of trading and working together. And I'm working at ThoughtWorks, which is a company that has 30 years of being a social experiment. What happens when you empower individuals and start working with things like inclusion, and really this whole meetup and this whole room is about providing a space for people to come and share knowledge. So we have a very ripe, fertile ground for technologists and for people who are very keen in the space of making social change. So we're trying to see what we can do in this area of providing more value to the world instead of just chasing money. How do we start to spend more of our time on things we actually care about and developing deeper social connections and enjoying life more instead of just doing things because we need to, let's say. Yeah, so if any of this sounds remotely interesting to you, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Please come reach out to us if you're interested in changing systems or structures. And you think ThoughtWorks could be a good fit, reach out to us there. If you're interested in getting involved in a decentralized world and joining teams over there that are developing code and thinking about changing society on that aspect, then also reach out to us. Or if you're interested in doing social work, come have a talk. We're very interested in like blending all of these areas together instead of having these different silos of chasing profit, chasing social work. Like how do we make life a holistic experience for everyone? Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about the nonprofit. At this point, I'll do a quick introduction to Niels. Yeah, I met him at a gym actually, and he was giving, besides the training courses, he had like a session in the evening, like 9:30, giving lectures about the body, which I went to, and it was fascinating. I had no idea about why I train my body in certain ways, and started getting very interested in that. And then somehow we started talking about depression, and he was like, "Oh, you struggle with depression," and it was a very different attitude than what I would normally come across. He was like, "Oh, I can tell you about it, and the way that the body works, like it also connects into the psyche and the cellular level." And I was just like so taken in with this enthusiasm. And yeah, since meeting him, my life really changed a lot. So I think he has a lot of wisdom to share in this area, and very lucky to have him present today. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Niels.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a funny introduction. That was the way we met, exactly. So like you already touched on, I'm very fascinated by the whole issue of how the body works and how the mind works and its interconnectedness, because we, in the Western world, tend to compartmentalize everything, right? So we kind of put everything into boxes, but when it comes to the human organism, it's one entity, and all these different facets have an interplay and work in reciprocity. So I never liked the idea of making the distinction of body and mind. And just a little bit of my background is that I'm still a sports student, so I'm studying exercise and coaching here in Cologne, but I kind of use that study more as a platform to really find a greater understanding of the human organism in its whole. And also I'm a coach, I'm a connecting link coach, which is a method I'm gonna explain a little bit on later on, near the end. And what I'm actually doing is that I want to do my so-called Heilpraktiker, which is in that case I'll be licensed to actually call what I'm doing therapy. So with that in hindsight, I'm not a licensed therapist. So take anything I present to you today with a grain of salt and take that into consideration and also question what I present to you. So again, we'll raise questions when you have any. But the way we're gonna go forward with this is that I'm gonna present you the basic principles of how the organism functions, and then you get a deeper and broader understanding of who you are and how you operate in the world. So that's my shtick, that everything is really rooted in fundamentals, right? So I'm going to touch on the biological fundamentals today. So we're going to start with, first off, here's my slides. So you can see right here, the main question is what are we, and how do we function embedded in the cell nucleus right here. So this is what we basically are, right? We are a bunch of cells. So with that, we're gonna look on the matter of depression first and what the current paradigm is, so we get a better understanding. I'll pull up the definition which we have in Germany, which is the ICD-10. And the ICD-10 is the official classification for coding diagnosis in outpatient and inpatient care. And I pulled up these two sentences, which is first off, we have episodes, individual occurrences of depression or mania, and recurrent disorders, repeated occurrences of episodes. And then also in the classification, we have the severity of the depression, which is described as either mild, moderate, or severe, or with psychotic disorders may also be present. So interesting about this already is the wording. So we do have a very clear understanding of, okay, as soon as I'm depressed, something is wrong with me. And I'm not really in favor of this general point of view. We have to have classifications though. So I'm standing in between two paradigms, and I'm gonna present an alternative paradigm to you right now, which would be the following. So another way to look at it is one that I liked, which is a doctor of psychology, Alison Escalante, who said, for generations, we have seen depression as an illness and unnecessary deviation from normal functioning. It's an idea that makes sense because depression causes suffering and even death. But what if we got it all wrong? What if depression is not an aberration at all, but an important part of our biological defense system? And so like I said, I'm going to hand you my view on the biological basis for her statement. And I'm gonna have to say that I'm not gonna touch on the psychotic cases or the manic cases of depression. I'm really touching on the cases which are logically understandable via the biological basis. Okie doke. Does anyone have questions so far, maybe already? Okay, so then we're gonna go forward. So to be able to suffer, you have to be able to evaluate, right? So you have to have relations. If you don't know anything, you have nothing to be able to evaluate. So in order to evaluate something, you have to be able to perceive it in the first place. So the first principle we're going to look at is, how do we perceive? What is perception? And we're going to look at it on a cellular level, because as I already said, you're pretty much just you're a pile of cells, right? So once you understand how a cell works, you get a way better understanding about yourself. It's really, really interesting. So I pull up, Dr. Andreas Spina is actually, he's a doctor of, he's a chiropractor actually. And he said something very great, which is, in the sum of the parts, there's only the parts. So now we're looking at the parts. And we're looking at the so-called cell receptors. So we have a little bit of basic biology right here. First off, I call this the so-called membrane, because this is kind of like the archaic system for perception, which is basically kind of the nervous system of the cell, if you want so. So your receptors receive information, they process it and pass it on. And they are the sensors or filter with which we perceive the outside world. And let's go to this bit right here. So right here, you see the outer layer of the cell, which is the cell membrane, right? And in the cell membrane, we have these little receptor proteins. And receptor proteins are pretty much like antennas. They are able to perceive external stimuli. So they also dictate what you are able to perceive in the total. So which is why we also, as humans, we cannot see UV light like some hawks probably do when they chase, right? So our receptors are first off kind of like they are what enable us to sift reality into the cells, and which enable us to have our 5 senses, that we can smell, that we can hear, that we can touch, that we can feel, that we can, what did I miss here? That we can taste. So these are the little units that enable you to do so. I'm turning into a ghost right now. The sun's really, yeah. Okay, so this process here is really, really interesting. We're going to touch on that later on as well, because when you see the process right here, you see how adaptation works. And adaptation is really just the answer of a cell of an external stimuli to be better equipped for future occurrences or events. So what we have right here is a signal molecule, and we have a specific receptor which is able to sense that molecule. And in reaction to that, it passes on the information down on the level of the DNA in this case, and then out of that comes a new protein. So here's already one very interesting and important aspect, is that your DNA is not autoregulative. So your DNA is not just switching itself on and spouts out proteins, like a bunch of proteins. It always needs a reason to do so, which is the level of the outer signal coming in, right? So same reason when I want to grow bigger biceps and I take a dumbbell and just curl it once, I won't get a bigger biceps when I do it just once, right? So there's this training effect, but with anything we do in life. So even when I want to, we know this as the sentence learning by doing. You have to do. So repetition to ingrain it on a cellular level first, to be better equipped in the future to get along with that task, whether that's learning a new language, whether that's learning an instrument or whatever. Okay, so always when we have enough intensity of the signal, enough frequency, we turn out to have new proteins. And proteins are not only the building block of what you are, they really build the structure, right? Everything you actually can see and touch, most of it is a bunch of proteins. But they also have signaling functions. We touch on that later on. Okay. So, as I said, we have to be able to perceive something in the first place. So that's how perception actually works. Now let's look at thoughts. And I already call this the map of reality, or making sense of the world, which is already interesting when we take the word sense, right? Because the way we make sense of the world is really only by our 5 senses. So based on the sensory data we are perceiving, we generate our thoughts, which includes our attitudes, our values, and expectations. So literally everything that comes to mind went through the filter of those receptors first, right? And then we have, again, we have taste, we have auditory, input, we have touch, we have visual inputs, and we have olfactory inputs. So if you think about it, it's actually a crazy thing that all your thoughts are filtered through these senses, and your whole identity is based on the senses you picked up. So to give you an example, when I would have been bitten by a dog as a child, I will, of course, ingrain that information, that sensory information of the pain I had on the tactile level, to be more careful in handling dogs later on in life, right? So this is actually how thoughts work. Thought works. Okay. So now we go to a level of emotions. And I find it very interesting that we still, in the Western society, we still have kind of an old school idea of what emotions are. Oftentimes when I have, when I'm speaking with friends, and they tend to say, yeah, but like in sports, yeah, it's just all in your mind. It's not all in your mind. It's always an association, right? So every human experience is an amalgamation of all this, what I'm going to present to you now. So emotions, feelings, somatic sensations, you could also say, are always involved. So emotions are a guide for conscious and subconscious decision making. Every emotion is adequate, but not every reaction is. So just like with the example of the dog, right? The emotion I have in the very moment that I see a dog again, and that I'm afraid, and that I have respect in handling it, is very rightful due to my experience I had in the past. But the reaction might not be when I have a little chihuahua in front of me, being 6'4" tall, way big and way stronger. Now, in any case, we're going to look at feelings first. I pulled up a very interesting, I'm so glad that I can actually now present this in a, yeah, I never did a presentation with this, but I found this study so super cool. Now, in any case, first off, we're going to look here on the left. So you can call your emotions a sort of evaluation monitor. So your emotions sort of evaluate the situation you're in. It's literally the sensations you feel in your body, and you can better describe them by valence, which is just, is it a good or bad experience, or a pleasant one or an unpleasant one? We can describe them with the intensity. So is it a very strong experience, or is it a lesser strong experience? We can describe the locality. Where do we experience this the sensation in our body? Is it in our stomach, right? If I have an aching heart, for example, if I have like stones that are sitting in my stomach or something, all these sensations we can have, like I feel dizzy, or I have a burden on my shoulders, and so forth. And then we have the form of movement, which I kind of touched on right now already. So it can feel like pressure. It can feel like an expansion. It can feel fast. It can feel slow. You can feel numb or empty even, but that's also a sensation, right? And that's exactly what you see with what this study right here did, which is so cool. Oh, shoot. Let me go back. Okay. So what we see here is not, they didn't take like a heating camera to see how people how people's heat map looks like, but what this was yeah, these were bodily sensations which were associated with different emotions. So we had in this study, I wasn't involved in the study, there were 701 people who had different stimuli from pictures and words and so forth, and they had to use a self-report method where they had two mannequins where they had to color in the regions of the body where they felt the bodily sensation. So red and yellow being high activity, as you can see here with the scale, and the bluish kind of color is always a lower activity. As you can see right here, when we look at depression, for some of you that makes probably a lot of sense. It did to me because I had my episodes of depression when I was about 16 years old, and I can totally relate to the depiction right here. This is very, very interesting to keep in mind because you can also work with this on a bodily level, right? As I already said, the body works in reciprocity. So you can tackle the whole issue of depression from different angles, as you already know, I guess. Anyway, so a little bit further with what happens now, what I already said, or with my example with the dog, is that when whatever experience we had, we adapt in the future. So depending on the perception and the resulting feelings, we react in such a way that we either are tense and or possibly turn away from the situation, like in my example of the dog, or B, either turn towards something or a person, right? So we are attracted towards something. And I just want this, I found it funny, the Drake memes, because the Drake meme is pretty much all about actually exactly this right here. So that's the theme of the meme. So, okay, on to the next one. Who's familiar with classical conditioning of Pavlov? Anyone? Raise your hand. Oh,
We got a thumbs up and a
Yeah,
check mark and
exactly.
yep.
So,
Yep.
cool. So I'm going to touch on it real quick. So what happens during classical conditioning is that a dog gets an unconditioned stimulus, which is food. And the response of the dog is that it's going to start to salivate. And when you have a bell and ring the bell and the dog is not used to the ring of the bell, nothing would really happen except for the dog to hear it. So you can combine and associate these two stimuli, so the food with the bell, and every time you give the dog the food bowl and ring the bell, it will start to learn this association. And after the conditioning time, it's enough to just ring the bell and get the salivation response. And I want to do a little experiment with you right now, which is you close your eyes, everyone close their eyes. Now imagine this, imagine you're standing in your kitchen, okay? Can you picture yourself standing in your kitchen? Go to the fridge, open the fridge, and there's a little lemon wedge sitting on, sitting just there. And you take the little lemon wedge, take it in your hand, squeeze it, smell it, and now bite into it. And really take a huge bite and try to really imagine the feeling of the juice running through your mouth and the pulp in your mouth. Now, do you have a salivation response, yes or no? Right? So we are, okay, one person says no. I kind of had this happening already with two, I was so excited to present this to two friends of mine. They were also just going like, nah, it's nothing happening. Most of the people actually, she doesn't make happens. Most of the people actually have this response, this reaction going on. And so we're not any different than Pavlov's dog in this case, in terms of that we really adapt to a situation with even a reaction that is really not in your control, because you can't control your physiology saying, okay, I'm going to salivate so much, so many milliliters. You can't control your peptides in your stomach acid to say, okay, I'm going to eat an apple now, so I'm going to produce so much peptides to break down the apple. So your physiology, it's so interesting, but your physiology is really just responding to your imaginary reality. And that's what I meant with the map of reality. Okay, so everything your body reacts to is pretty much happening here. And there's this reciprocity again. It's, you can, like we just had in this example, you can think about that happening and it happens, but you can also just freaking eat a lemon, right? So let's take this a little further. Oh shit, we were there. So we go to trauma, and I'm gonna deliver you a way different definition of what trauma is, as you probably know it. So first off, trauma can happen in three categories: either fight, or flight, or freeze. So notice this is a bug lying on its back like that. It's not that obvious, I think. But okay, fight, flight, or freeze. So those are the three responses that we have towards stress, right? In my case with the dog, flight. I'm not going near that dog. So let's see what I mean with my definition. This is really just the definition that I have, which makes sense to me based on the biological basis. So I believe that it is a subconscious reaction pattern encompassing your feelings, your thoughts, your physiology, and your reactive behavior, so motorically, based on adverse experience. So we have to have this distinction going on here, because in the case of the lemon, it's not really an adverse experience if you like lemons, right? So in the case of bad experience, you have the same kind of patterning going on anyway, but in reaction towards bad experiences you had in the past. So that to me makes a lot more sense, to make that distinction of having trauma and potentially traumatic events. So you can have a better understanding of both, right? Because if you would generalize trauma being a potentially traumatic event, not every potential traumatic event for each person is equally traumatic. Is that understandable? So it's really how resilient am I as a person for a stressful situation. And that's also just my recent constitution, because if I'm hungry and I need to pee, I'm a very grumpy person. So maybe you can relate to that. And I'm not very resilient to stress in that case. Now, let's touch on the cause. So potentially traumatic events. So we're gonna look into childhood, youth, and adolescence first. And most of our experiences that we ingrain really deeply are happening during childhood. So there's two ways that could go. First, we have bad things that happen that should not have happened. So that could be abuse, that could be loss, like loss being, for example, death of a loved one, but also arrest and incarceration. It could also be your parents splitting up, for example, right? Violence, which could either be first or second hand, just observing violence in your neighborhood could also already traumatize you. Addictive behavior, running in the family, for example, if you see your family having drug issues, for example. Stress, which could also be first or second-hand experiences. And generally being objectified. So any of these things happening towards you, coming from another person, could be potentially traumatic. And I found this is really, really, really interesting. This was actually also my last Instagram post, being objectified. It's so interesting that you as a human being, the way we come into this world, when you are a baby, you have not an inherent system which tells you what is what. I have a 6-month-old daughter, and she doesn't know what a car is, for example, right? So the way we actually perceive the world when we come into this world is one of potentiality. And then we learn to what is during our interaction. So via the interaction with something, you get a sense again. You get a sense of utility and then therefore meaning. And we have that running through our life. As we are children, we subjectify our stuffed animals, for example. We talk to them and engage with them in imaginary play. And later on, when we are grown-ups, we don't lose that kind of perception. We still kind of treat other people as utility, for example. So we are able to make other people literally objects, and no one likes that when that is happening to you. So imagine yourself being in traffic and trying to park your car in a foreign city, and it's super stressful because you're super confused, you don't know the surroundings, and then you're trying hard, and behind you someone honks at you angrily, like not that honk, but the and that makes you angry, right? Because you're really trying hard and you're disregarded as the person that you are. So this is really one super important aspect and basic piece of knowledge I think every human being should actually learn, because if we just know this, we could actually take better care when we have an interaction going on, whether that subject to subject relationship is established, whether the other person is treating me as an object, or whether I'm making myself the object of my expectations, of my ideals, of my teachings, maybe even. So very, very interesting aspect. Now, the second one could be, and this one is also kind of neglected, ironically, good things that should have happened but didn't. Especially as a child, you're very, very, very dependent from your caretakers, of your parents. So when they don't give you the affection and attention that you need, maybe just for a brief moment, you can ingrain that. I have a friend that I coached once. He has this issue that he's on the grind 24/7. So really working his ass off with this belief, I have to be perfect. And we touched on that. And the thing that came up was that once in his life, his brother has a certain sickness, and they had to they were at the hospital. So he was standing in front of the bed and his parents around him, and he felt so out of place and so neglected with his needs and so forth. So those situations are really, really hard. So it was really just a brief moment of, great, I'm not important. And we went back to that situation, and he actually had to cry about it, even though him being the person now would say, my brother has all the right to have all the attention right now because he's not well, right? Very, very interesting story. Now, okay, so these are two things or two aspects that not only could happen to us as children, but also in our youth and in our adolescence and as grown-ups. So these are the ways you can have this sort of reaction pattern being ingrained in your nervous system. Now, but of course you have also a genetic factor, and I want to touch on one real quick, which is it's my face. Catechol O-methyltransferase. To make a long story short, it's a genetic mutation. So in your DNA sequence, where just one bond is just a little different, which results into that you have, again, think of the cell spouting out proteins or spitting out, generating proteins, that you have a lesser amount of proteins that are able to break down stress hormones. So in that case, you have a constant higher tonic secretion of stress hormones in your whole body. And then your prevalence for depression and a reduced stress resilience and anxiety and addiction are higher. So this is actually an interesting thing to take into consideration, that this could also be a factor for people being more prone for depression. So another one is an epigenetic factor, so-called. So epi meaning above, so above genetic. So in this case, which is super interesting, which was a study conducted by the Max Planck Institute, they found out that with Holocaust survivors and also World War II soldiers, that their next generation and the generation after that even had passed on the epigenetic signature from the person being in the war, which means that they didn't see, what they didn't see was that that these people had mutations in their DNA between those bonds, but what was different was their chemical makeup. So the proteins, for example, that were running around, they could be also probably leading into such a genetic mutation, maybe. So over time we adapt structurally as well. So that could lead to that. But ultimately, what that actually means is their chemicals were set up for them to be less prone to stress in the moment they were how do you say, exposed to a potential traumatic event than other people. So also very interesting. Some of the trauma and by trauma I mean the reaction pattern in you, is not even happening because of your conscious experience, but it's passed on from generations before. And being, most of us I saw being in Europe, we are kind of like, it's a little bit in our heritage that we have that going on. Now, what to do about it? So the way we deal with all of this is that we have, again, back, compensation. So the way we deal with stress or that reaction pattern going on is that we self-soothe, we compensate, we could also say adaptive behavior, you could just give it different names, but think of any addictive, compulsive or impulsive behavior which you see in our whole society, what people just do on a hyper level and can't leave it. That in that case, you actually have an indication of someone probably being traumatized for whatever reason. So the ways you could self-soothe could be either by consumption, which could be an overconsumption or maybe even too little, right? Like in eating disorders, for example. It could be exertion, so physically and mentally. It could be withdrawal and retreats, where I would say this is the case of depression, I think. So we have all these different kinds of ways we could self-soothe, right? We can also fall into the bit of modulating our appearance, sex and porn, shopping, working 24/7. So our burnout mannequins right there, media, of course, any sort of drugs, physical exertion, but also I thought of the example of hooligans. So I think maybe even that is sort of like a kind of compensation for perceived stress in life. Food, and then we have this right here. So you see, all of this are just different possibilities, and if you want, so phenotypes of how to deal with emotional reaction patterns and thought patterns and physiological patterns going on within your organism. And this right here is just one way to do it. So if you look at this is all normal. It's very hard to say what is normal and what is not. So there you have nuances, and we have to have these nuances going on. And we have to be able to call some certain states disorders, like bipolar disorder, for example, or psychotic ones, for example. But in many cases, many depressions I've seen in my surroundings, with my friends, with my family members, and so forth, it's more of just a matter of retreating from society to really get a grip of what is actually happening with me and what's happening around me, and get more into a thinking state. Okie doke. So let's look at the nature of suffering. So why is it actually that we suffer? How does that actually happen? And basically, there's an experiential difference between thoughts and beliefs. Mere thoughts do not hurt us. We suffer only when our beliefs contradict reality, that which is. For example, let's say I wanted to meet up with Tim and I expected him to come to the place so-and-so at 3 o'clock and he didn't show up. And it is only already in the wording if I would say, well, he didn't show up. It's way different than he fucking ditched me. He ditched me, right? There's a different story going on. So when I believe that he had to show up because he's my friend, I expect of him that he needs to be there when I need him there. I will suffer because my whole idea is filled with, I'm making him, in that moment, I'm making him the object of my expectations. But maybe in reality, his train didn't come. There were technical problems on the railroad or something, or his car broke down, or he was involved in an accident or something, right? So this is very interesting when we have that, again, that map of reality mismatching with the reality that is. And it's already kind of in control for us to think of things differently and just go, well, let's look at the situation right now objectively. Anyway, so let's look into the matter of self-awareness in this case, because that's oftentimes this goes hand in hand. So being aware of what's happening, right? And this is also new to you. This is so super interesting. Self-awareness is not self-analyzing. So what self-awareness is not is analyzing every thought, analyzing every reaction, and constantly rethinking your thinking. If you guys are, some of you are certainly overthinkers who are here. I think, I believe. So, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be interested in such a topic. I myself kind of am, I tend towards being an overthinker. Just only already when you're just, I don't know, when you're, I don't need to elaborate on that topic, but so going into self-analyzing, what I mean by that is exactly that, what I just said is overthinking. And what you already probably know from late night overthinking, maybe in your bed, is that you're really trapped inside your mind. And the things that you try to ask maybe is, why am I like this? Why did I react like that? Why do I think the way I do? And so forth. And it's really a rabbit hole. You don't get out of there and you just start to ruminate. And we actually know, just like Grant and Franklin in 2002 here found out, frequent self-analyzers are more prone to be depressed, anxious, and have low well-being. And Eurich, who is a very interesting person, I will touch on it later. People who self-analyze more were more stressed, depressed, and anxious, less satisfied with their relationships, more self-absorbed, and felt less in control of their lives. So the problem with self-analyzation, it's actually not a problem. Self-analyzing is actually a good thing if you do it right? Because you can either just go way into the past and get stuck there. And oftentimes when you try to use that for a recent situation, just right, let's say I'm working at the supermarket and someone is just a little bit annoying towards me, and I'm starting to yell at them or something because they were really, really mean. And then later on, I come home and I will think to myself, my God, why did you do that? And probably, maybe my blood sugar was low, right? So there's no, as soon as you start the why questions, there's too much leeway for different stories coming into play. And that's what actually the whole problem of suffering is just that we're telling ourselves stories all the time. So the better way to do it, to get self-awareness, is to ask what questions, because they tend to promote future focus and a more optimistic way of thinking. So, for example, what am I struggling with? What support could I use? What are my strengths in coping, right? Because the coping strategies I just presented, they're not all bad, right? So some of them, if I'm a hard worker, that's actually a good thing if I'm working towards something that's valuable, for example, right? So anyway, so we know from a scientific standpoint, by this person, keep this name in mind, write this one down. That's a very good resource right there, Tasha Eurich. Research suggests when we see ourselves clearly, we are more confident and more creative. We make sounder decisions, build stronger relationships, and communicate more effectively. We are less likely to lie, cheat, and steal. We are better workers, we get more promotions, and we are more effective leaders with more satisfied employees and more profitable companies. And what this is all about is really just the thing of thinking towards the future and more of how do I form myself into the person in my life, into the life that I want to. So that's a better way to self-analyze. And I can really, yeah, her book is really, really great. There's a couple of TED Talks that she gives where she's handing out tips how to do that. So really good, yeah, really good resource, as I said. Okay. So how do I change? I have this analogy, the cinema. So at the basis of how you operate is your beliefs. Your beliefs are really, for example, in my example with Tim, when he doesn't show up, he ditched me. It could be a belief of, well, I'm not good enough or something, which is why I'm not important enough to him that he shows up. So my map of reality shows in my life experience that he ditched me. But to maybe change that around is to be aware of what's happening right here. If I want to have another experience, I don't change the map of reality itself, because that's already the lens with which I look into the world, but I need to work on the fundamentals. So when I'm really asking myself in the moment with Tim, for example, right? Did he actually ditch me, or is he's just not there? So he's not there. So my thinking will give me another experience, another way of maybe thinking about it. So, and this is, this boils down what I do with my work is working on the level of beliefs. So really the root of where sensory information and experiences we had become our operating values and so forth, beliefs. Okie dokie. So far, so good. So a new way, a more suitable paradigm to look at all of this, drum roll. Again, Alison Escalante, the woman from the beginning. One of the symptoms of depression is shame, a sense of having let other people down or being unworthy to be with them. When people are told that depression is an aberration, we are telling them that they are not part of the tribe. They are not right. They don't belong. That's when their shame deepens and they avoid social connection. We have cut them off from the path that leads them out of depression. It is time that we start honoring the courage and strength of depressed people. It is time we start valuing the incredible capacity of our biology to find a way in hard times. And it is time that we stop pretending depressed people are any different than anyone else. And that's a very beautiful way I think, to look at it. Like I said, it's actually just adaptive behavior in most cases. So with my coachees that I had in my coaching sessions, for example, oftentimes the beliefs that I found were something like, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve to feel well, I'm a joke, I'm not good enough, I can't be successful, I'm unlovable, I have to be perfect, for example. So this is very, very common. And how to finally really get a change of all that is, first off, that the absolutely most important thing is that you have a place of robust safety. That's really the most important aspect. You have to have a place where you live, where you have robust safety, or people that give you robust safety. And therefore also you have to have a supportive social network. These two things are absolutely mandatory. And that's exactly what we also with the Dreamorganism try to offer, is exactly that. So a couple of tips that I want to hand out today, which I personally find super interesting, are better sleep hygiene. I wrote 10 p.m., but make it 11 p.m. So I not misspelled that. It's just the wrong time. So no screen time after 11 p.m. because you will, after 11 p.m. screen time means you're gonna get a dopamine hit, which leads to more overthinking later in bed. So keeping track of better sleep hygiene will make you ruminate less and lessens your prevalence for depression also. So take dance classes. And this one is really, I can stress this one enough because you have exercise. And from there, you have already endorphins and serotonin being involved from a physiological level, right? So as I already said, you have different angles from which you can work on. And another thing is that you can have a support social network in your dance classes. And more than that, it was the University of London, where they conducted research and concluded that dance boosts mood more than exercise does alone, which is actually hardly surprising because already you're moving to rhythm, and we are really, as human beings, all we do is we love patterns, right? And as soon as we have already musical patterns, music that we love, it's already feeling good. But moving to that and seeing other people doing that as well really activates the pleasure circuits. And it's really interesting when you look at people that are in an MRI, so doing brain scans of people that are watching other people dancing. There's something very interesting happening, because in the moment you see someone else dancing, you put yourself into their shoes. So when they're dancing joyfully, your physiology starts to think that you are dancing joyfully. Whereas when they're dancing sadly and expressing themselves sadly, the same thing would happen. So what you also learn is empathy, which is really worth the try to do that. So dance classes, super cool workout, very good on many levels. Okay, and then I can recommend psychosomatic oriented treatment methods to work on the past, which involves EFT, emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. Some of you may be familiar with that. Somatic experiencing by Peter Levine. Connect and link is what I do, and wing wave. These are tools where you work on the level of your beliefs and on the level of your somatic experience, when you are kind of like, you take the lemon experiment, for example, and you put yourself into a situation and you relive it again. So these are all using methods that are used in trauma therapy, especially EMDR is very well researched with veterans working on, it works for PTSD very well. Slightly better than cognitive behavioral therapy and even pharmaceuticals, whereas EFT does have the same effect strength, interestingly enough. So both are super potent treatment methods for working on past trauma and getting rid of that reaction pattern. So the story is still there, but your whole body doesn't react to it anymore. Your physiology doesn't react to it anymore with the stress felt wherever. And another tool to do self-analyzation, which I can wholeheartedly recommend, is the work by Byron Katie. So this right here, how can I zoom into it? Again, zooming out. The work by Byron Katie, super, super good. She has a website up, thework.com, and you can get her resources for free. So you have worksheets with which you can work. But before you do that, I would always promote looking for a therapist in the first place. And then something for the future, I put that in brackets, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which in recent studies showed that it is 4 times more effective than cognitive behavioral therapy, but in most countries still illegal and not yet a form of therapy which is generally loose. So that's a thing for the future. It's going to be very, very interesting in the development of that. And other than that, I can really, really recommend, I can stress this one enough, is make a plan for the future. And you have different ways to do that. For example, the self-authoring program by Jordan Peterson, which you can find online, selfauthoring.com, where you plan out your future. Most of us don't, and therefore you don't have meaning to which you can work towards. So that's a very, very, very important thing to have, because you'll have a reason why you get up in the morning. And then we have Tasha Eurich, who also promotes or gives out different methods of how to work to map out your future and yourself in the here and now. So that's it. That's all I've got to say today. And now I'm gonna make room for any questions that come up, or yeah.
Thank you so much, Niels, and also to Timothy. I just wanted to ping into the chat some resources in case anyone is really in a tough situation. It's 2 resources that can help you locate emergency services and therapists, for example, in your area. So of course, always reach out for support, and yeah, just have a look for those resources in the chat. Thanks. Just wanted to say that. And we don't have any questions in the chat. So if you have questions, please put them in there right now. Yeah. Okay. Umpo, do you want to unmute yourself, or you like me to ask this for you?
I can ask it.
Okay, cool.
So my question is, can one be depressed and not know about it?
I think if you're not familiar with what the definition or what the symptoms are, and you just feel bad, right? And that on a very constant basis for a recent period of time, of course you can actually, I think probably most of us were depressed in the beginning state, or when they were depressed, didn't really know what was going on. Myself, at least, when I was 16, I was not knowing what was going on, because it was so new to me. I actually had a great childhood, and then all went south during my youth, and it was such a new experience, so I didn't know what to call it. But actually 2 years later, I really just realized, oh, okay, this is happening. So I think it's just a matter of knowing the classifications. Does it help?
How does one know those classifications?
Hmm?
You're saying it's a matter of knowing classifications?
Yeah, exactly. So symptoms, for example, like what are the associations, the beliefs, the behaviors that people have when they are depressed. So if you're unfamiliar with that, you very likely have the whole experience of depression going on, but can't put a name on it. You know what I mean?
Yep. Thanks.
I can also answer that from personal experience. Like, I was suicidal. I didn't even know I was depressive. So, yeah, there was such an aversion to saying, "Hey, I'm depressive," or because in my head it made sense to me what was going on, and having that label, and people would tell me, "Oh, you should go to the doctor and or take medication. There's something wrong with you." It's like, whoa, like I was very averse to hearing that or even wanting to believe that about myself. And yeah, I think it takes a while to actually have an understanding of what's actually going on. And that's why I really appreciate Niels's effort to explain also from the cellular, the biological levels, and not just label it as like there's something wrong with you. Like finished.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in many circumstances, it feels like there's a logic to depression. Like if you think of the conditions that we find ourselves in, sometimes to not be depressed under certain circumstances would seem quite an aberration, maybe. So I think this is quite valuable, what you've been sharing about like removing the stigma and seeing the logic that's there. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and I don't want to play down the whole experience of depression just by saying, "Oh, it's just a normal thing," right? So that's not what I want to do. Just so you're aware.
Amre has just shared something in the chat. I can read it out. I don't know, Amre, if you feel comfortable, you can also unmute yourself as you like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read it. So what I found in recent years, more and more of my friends are struggling with depression linked to the state of the world. So things like the climate crisis or kind of different injustices and just getting bigger. How can we shape our reality with those kind of bigger powers in place? Like how can we kind of, like what have you found that helps with dealing with that while not trying to sink into depression?
Very good question. Yeah. So that's also normally associated with depression, or this is an interesting case of how you can setting yourself up, putting in your map of reality a nihilistic worldview, right? So a sort of meaninglessness and powerlessness towards all these things that are happening, but it's not, you're not helping with, you're not helping yourself or the world when you say, okay, I can do anything about this. But I could touch on that for another hour, but the only action you really have in life to make change is through yourself and through your persona and the skills you have and you can share with the world, right? So to just briefly come back to what Gandhi said, if you want to see the change in the world, be the change in the world. So focus on your own problems first and try to manage those before tackling on or feeling the need the world has to change for me. I mean, you can either wrap the world in burlap or just wear a pair of shoes if your feet hurt, right? So make yourself resilient.
I would also touch on that point. It can be very difficult to help or support people, depending on what beliefs, thoughts, communication skills you have yourself and experience. I would also say as well, like focus on yourself and your own skills. Like I was doing therapy for a very long time, and I think what Niels highlighted there, which is like super valuable, is this idea of I think people who are often depressed don't have a very good social network. They don't know how to communicate. It's really hard to say, hey, look, I feel lonely or hurt or sad. Like if you don't have that skill, you can be drowning in that for years. And even in traditional the therapy that I did, most therapists are taught to have a certain distance, and they don't want to get you dependent on them, so on and so forth. And that has a certain wisdom to it, perhaps, but again, they're not offering a social structure or giving you encouragement or like, hey, like I'm here for you or anything like that. So how do you start to structure and understand it? In families, as I talked about in the beginning, is a quite interesting example, because you would assume that kids and families and parents have very deep bonds, and often we see that breaking down. Even there, we don't know how to support them to make it a deep, intimate connection. So the work is not on looking at the kid and saying, you're a bad child, why can I not connect? What's stopping me from opening up and talking? Why can I not listen? Why do I get frustrated? And once we start to do that self-work, we actually start to be able to be more dependable, to be able to provide a base for people to be able to reach out and like see when they're also struggling and intimately connect with them in ways that maybe they don't even know they need. It's tough.
It is tough.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm just looking, we have some activity in the chat. I can read these out if the people who've written them can. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, otherwise I can read that. Okay.
Okay, you mentioned about supportive social network, and I think some social networks, they are not social, but what you really need sometimes are real good friends who listen to your emotions, to your feelings, who do not want to correct you, and when they understand why you feel that way, then they can say, okay, I help you to go out, to go there. I had some depression a long time ago. Medicaments and therapists do not help really. What really helps are friends. What really helps is seeing things different, to see the small things that work, and don't focus and concentrate on everything what does not work, and analyze why it does not work and why I am guilty for things don't happen the way I want them to happen, and so on.
That is actually
negative self-thoughts, I think so.
Yeah, you just presented exactly what I meant with supportive social network. I don't mean social media when I said that. Okay, so that's a great example. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
I also want to touch on that point. I think like you mentioned therapist doesn't work. I think it does work. It's just not, I think it can be improved. And that's a part of what we also want to do, is I can figure out how to build systems where this is something we're focused on. It's not about chasing other things or money, that we take the time to slow down to build these skills, because once we have that, I believe any company or any project you undertake is much more meaningful, enjoyable, and the work and the output you do is much better when you can actually be present, and you're not fearful of your colleagues or anything like this. You actually
So what I want to add to that is, when you're looking for a therapist, what's really what's determining the results in the first place is really, do you absolutely feel safe with this person to say about anything, like you just said with your friends, right? That they don't judge you for what you're about to say and think. So that is absolutely mandatory when you have a therapist, to be able to do that. When you already realize, because it was my hindrance, that I had a very great therapist and I really liked the person, but there were some things I was so ashamed of that I didn't want to touch on those topics and those thoughts, because I was afraid she would judge me for that, which is actually, for my part, I thought, oh, that's such a stupid thing to do, but I was just really afraid, right? So that was my reaction pattern going on. So that was where I experienced one limitation during my therapy. And the other thing being, again, robust safety. Yeah, no, that's actually everything. You just have to really click with the person when you're looking out for a therapist. I think that's, yeah, it's self-evident actually, but just want to put that out again.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a comment from Ken Bryan. I'm going to read it out. If you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that, but I can do it until then. So yes, I called it the dark cloud when I was young. Now I understand its triggers. And even after I know what I'm going through, it's hard to make a hard switch. Access to therapists is limited in Kenya. So the second best tool is simple self-awareness. So here we have someone who doesn't have ready access to therapists.
Yeah.
So these strategies become very helpful.
Yeah. So one thing, which is when you do the work on your own, it's a very, very, very slippery slope, because what can happen depending on the experiences you had when you really, like, I wouldn't recommend anyone who was sexually abused, for example, to do work on their own, because when you work with self-awareness and you kind of get back to try to work on those past situations on your own, you can really trigger yourself in some deep traumatizing experience again. So I would not recommend doing the work on yourself when you are in a depressive kind of state or in a bad state, because the way memory works, I could do another talk just about that for an hour. The way memory works is very interesting, because you have very little factual details from a memory, and you fill those gaps with your current map of reality. So when your current map of reality is a depressive one, and you work on the past, so you fill in the gaps with even more negativity, right? So it's a very bad idea, because then the past experience can become even worse. So keep that in mind. It's very important. So that's why a social network is super important to be able to catch you. Right, so if you want to do that, I wouldn't recommend it, but work on yourself when you're really, really in a good place.
Thank you. Julia, would you like, I can see your, if you give me a thumbs up, you can, great, you unmuted yourself. Would you like to say what you wrote?
Yeah, so
Sure.
I'm kind of wondering, I have a couple of really well-connected and usually really happy friends. And I have the impression that now in the pandemic, at first they were okay, and now more and more of them are kind of losing it. And I was wondering, apart from the obvious thing that, you know, you cannot go to a dancing class at the moment, let's say, what is it that makes it so extra hard, and why does it at least seem to get worse and worse?
The current situation, you mean?
Yeah.
Our current situation, yeah. The first one being, oh, the cameras.
Oh, there you go.
So the first thing being the lack of social interaction, right? That's so super important, because we are social beings. I can give you an example again from a biological standpoint. If you look at the organism that Niels, I am just a pile of cells, right, which perceive all these external stimuli, and all this bunch of cells just say, okay, we are this identity, we call ourselves Niels. So the whole evolution from millions of years ago went on to me coming into this world as the cell alliance via the basis that cells at some point said we can work better together. We should do that because we are more resilient with this hostile world around us. Let's do that. So do you want to become a better organism with me? And the cell said, yes, let's do the shit. And became a more resilient organism, and then we became multicellular organisms, and now we are human beings who also just put the same behavior out, right? The way we live is via social bonding. So you could take what Darwin said, it's not only survival of the fittest, but also survival of the friendliest. I find that very true. And this is lacking greatly during this times of the pandemic, of course. It's super hard for us.
So we're just kind of wearing out more and more.
Kind of, yeah. If you're not really working towards, yeah, you have to kind of compensate for that, right?
Well, I guess.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'm just kind of wondering why, because people, they're kind of running out of options.
Yeah, exactly. It's really bad. And the question is always, what questions? What can I do now? Not why, because you end up in a rabbit hole you can't get out of. Ask the what can I do with the situation? What is it that I can do for, if I'm seeing a person, how to have the greatest time of having that time with the person. Really, really embrace that, make it a party for yourself. I don't know, give them flowers, just really make it a really, really good time. And it will be more worthwhile, of course. So we have to put a little more effort maybe in our social interactions when we have any, that will help. And other than that, like I said, go to bed earlier than you would expect. You'll feel way better, which has to do with circadian rhythms. They are very, very important. Another topic. Go on rambling for hours. Yeah, maybe. So circadian rhythm is very, very important. We live by day and we sleep during the night, and we kind of F that up because we have external lights and we have our screens that can entertain us. Get some really good sleep and you will feel very different, right? Exercise, move, get sunlight, eat better, and it will be easier on you for sure. It's still not easy, especially in these circumstances when you are depressive, but there is things that you can do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would answer that from like a different viewpoint or angle. Because when all of this hit, actually, it was, for me, I felt like the world was starting to fall into place with more like how I felt, so if that makes any sense, which is because I felt like I didn't fit in anyway. And it's one way to maybe, if you would agree that there were issues going on before, we had climate change, we had, and if one was not aware of those or that wasn't affecting one could also say, hey, if you're living in a pathological sick system and feeling great about it, maybe there's something actually wrong with you. So once the world starts to shift and change around, you may, like the patterns and interactions are automatically going to change. A lot of people might not have adaptive strategies for those that are making them feel great. And so all of a sudden they have to start thinking differently, feeling differently. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like I'm not actually sure how to feel fulfilled anymore. The work, the things I was using to take away my time. And someone asked a question about like, how do I know when I'm depressed? And that's just a definition. But if we look at it as a scalar type thing, and something I like coming here and giving a talk and expressing my opinions, and this is something that has been a long time coming to get to this stage where I feel comfortable and I actually have something valuable to share, and I can, like Niels was saying, right, like I'm not worthless, or and that's, I think for a lot of people, it's like they have a lot more actually in them that they could give, and a lot of dreams and things that have been squashed, and so suddenly realizing, hey, look, the world is changing, there's different opportunities. Who am I? What am I? What do I want to do? And it can be challenging for people, I think. But I also see it as a potential positive shift. The fact that we can come together now and start to try and reimagine things, try to change things, to do things differently. So.
Thank you. All right, maybe we're going to have some more questions in, but maybe I would ask Niels and Timothy if like we're leaving this meetup today and we can remember just a few things that, or maybe put in a few things into action, or would you mind sharing like some of these, or as an alternative, some parting words of wisdom to end your session?
If I can give you some advice for now. I already did that actually, right?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely did that. But if there, I don't know, like, okay, then maybe then my second part, if you would like to co-host this, or like final words for the group as we start to wind down.
Yeah.
I think I would say be curious, like try and be like a child again. You know, like there's no reason why you can't be so excited for life and dance around and actually enjoy it. That sounds weird, but it took me a long time to get back to that. You know, like, oh, you know, I can actually dance and sing and be silly and paint and whatever it is. And yeah, I think that's one thing I would say. Be curious, ask questions, don't keep asking. Yeah, don't ask what, like, you know, just ask things about yourself. Why am I not doing? I don't know. That's contradictory.
It is. It is. I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah. If you do it wisely.
Ask yourself what questions then, I guess.
What is it that I can do? Anyway, I'm just really hoping you could take anything out of this that is helping you, and maybe get an idea of the options that I present that you can take from to get yourself in a better state if you are in a bad state. So really, really, really hoping for you that's going to get better. And exactly, don't wait too long to reach out for help. It's really just taking time. It's not smart. It took me so long to admit myself to go to therapy. My depressive episodes started with when I was 16, when I had harsh incidences in between that took me back until I was 27, I think. And that was the time then when all hell broke loose, that I decided, okay, I have to go now, but I wish I would have done that way earlier. So 1 decade of waiting is a very long time to wait. And I had many problems piling up and many issues developing just from that. So can't recommend that.
Thank you very much. And we've got this recording. We'll send it out to the people who RSVP'd yes on Meetup, and maybe we can share a list of the resources that were in the deck, some of them, so people can follow up some of the names of the authors, some different strategies and so on. That might be cool.
Should I write this in the chat or?
No,
Oh, no, we can do that afterwards, just to let people know. If you wanted some of the info that was given, we can provide that if you RSVP'd in the Meetup app.
Sweet. Cool.
Yeah. Then as I don't see any more questions, I would just say thank you so much to Niels and Timothy for your time, for sharing your insights. And thanks so much everyone for joining tonight. Great to have you here to have this discussion. So yeah, wishing you all a great evening and thanking you one more time. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for showing up.
yes, thank you for showing up.
You guys.
Okay.
Bye-bye.